Mom's gonna take a shower. Come on now. Boy, come on. Go. Okay, go in the bedroom. Quiet. Come on, baby.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's the appointed hour of 7 o'clock. Thank you all for being here. Purpose of our work session this evening is presentation discussion of methods tackling the sanitary sewer system. And lost my note all of a sudden. From discussions at IDA and the realities looking at the VDOT property, and then issues that have arise out of the Diamond Hill project, found it in discussions with Jim that it'd be beneficial for us to take a broader, more global look at our infrastructure and certainly look at things that are critical to the services that we provide our friends and neighbors. So that's the purpose and the genesis of the work session this evening. That came on pretty fast, and I apologize for the tight window and materials not getting out to you sooner, but Jim and Jeff are going to walk us through the document that you received and welcome questions. And I think this is intended to be a conversational presentation as well. But with that, I will bounce past it to Jim and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. We're going to delve into the wonderful world of sanitary sewers, and I'm really glad it's after dinner and not before. So we all know, of course, that we've had significant issues and concerns rise up lately about our sanitary sewer system. And rather than continue to circle the periphery of this issue, we really need to get to the heart of the issue. And part of the issue is that we should recognize and do clearly know that much of the system has not been maintained over many decades. We have areas of the community that are served by sanitary system that is 60, 80, or 100 years old. And before we delve into that further, I think we all should also recognize we're not looking back over our shoulder. We're not looking at councils in the past or city managers or staff in the past who failed to deal with this issue. We're looking forward so we can say we dealt with it positively and have a positive impact on what our community is able to accomplish in the years to come. And we also know that there are many challenges we wrestle with, many priorities. And as long as the toilets flush, the showers come on and drain, it's been easy for all of us, including those managers and councils in the past, to ignore what's underground. We don't see it, there's no problem. We just keep on going, dealing with the issues at hand. And there are many examples of failures that we've seen today that are small examples of this problem. One recently is the 200 feet of sewer line that we had to replace in the golf course. And Jeff, I know you pointed out a few other areas recently that we've dealt with. Can you maybe share those real quickly, a few of those with council, just a brief explanation of what those were? Or do you not have them with you? Apparently Jeff isn't picking up. So anyway, there were several other smaller projects.
I'm here. I didn't bring it with me, Jim, but I know we had the recent one on Peyton Place where we had to replace, it wasn't a very significant portion, but maybe 30 foot of old terracotta line that had offset joints and severe root intrusion. And then we had a significant stretch on Lee Avenue just in the past week that actually, again, it was all terracotta line, offset joints, root intrusion, and it actually flooded the basement. Luckily, it was an earthen basement. I went home and we just got done finishing up this week. I sent Jim maybe 6 other areas that we did. One was off of Ross.
And the important thing, I guess,
old terracotta line, offset joint.
Thank you, Jeff. One of the most important things to take away from that is even though some of these breaks, like the golf course, was probably only a 10-foot section, oftentimes putting a new piece of pipe in 10 foot doesn't take care of the issue, because now you've got 100 feet of old pipe on either end of it, and that's going to go too in the very near future. So you have to replace a very long stretch when you're doing these repairs in many instances. It's the most effective way to deal with that issue rather than 10 feet a year, year in, year out over many years. So again, just some examples. Are there any more questions for Jeff or myself at this point? So let's go into some of the challenges that we have to consider in the future. One is we know we have a 30-year capital improvement program that was put in place or identified in 2015 by Anderson and Associates. 45 projects were identified at that point in time. And to date, we really haven't touched on a lot of those projects. The two major projects we've got in line now, one in design and engineering, the Diamond Hill project, the other in the Jackson area project. And even when we finish those projects, which have not started yet, we would still have 33 additional projects that need to be dealt with in a 30-year time frame. And we're already 5 years into that 30-year time frame. The Diamond Hill project, unfortunately, and many of these projects were put in place under certain assumptions. One of the assumptions was that terracotta pipe that Jeff refers to could be slip lined with PVC pipe. Very effective, very efficient way of restoring the capacity in those pipes. And it's pretty cost effective. What we've unfortunately found with the Diamond Hill project is that much of that terracotta pipe is in such bad shape that we really cannot slip line it. It has to be dug up and completely replaced, which is again why we're looking at approximately at this time a $1.3 million cost overrun in the Diamond Hill area project. Now below there are 5 or 6, well, there are 5 fiscal years of projects that we've lined up, including the Diamond Hill project, the Jackson area, and the Highland Road projects or Central Jackson area projects. And the amounts that those projects are estimated to cost today without any assumptions as to will we experience any other overruns because of the kind of pipe we're going to see there. And again, Jeff is the expert. Jake has put together the dollars with Jeff and Jake. Do you have any questions for either of them at this point? Okay. Another thing I want to point out this time that's important to understand is the list of projects that we have, and this is 5-year list is clearly not all those projects for the sanitary sewer system, but the list we have before us is mirrored by similar list of projects in the water line underground projects or underground services. And it's important for us to understand that as we generate revenues in the utility fund, we have to fund both sanitary sewer improvements and water line improvements. So we cannot assume that the revenues we raise, if we are to increase rates, can all be designated and used for the sanitary system. We just have to remember we're balancing 2 sets of projects from one revenue stream that go into the utility funds. Okay. Questions at this time? Okay. The next issue I want to deal with again is something that we've all become very painfully aware of, and that's the system I&I that we have. We know that if you look at the illustrations that were presented by Jeff recently because of the recent rain we had a week and a half ago, that our dry weather flow system-wide is about 1 million gallons a day, maybe a tad bit less. When we had that heavy rain, we were at over 6.5 million gallons per day. Now that does a couple things for us, and they're all negative. One is that we have to pay the MSA for all those gallons that are going through the wastewater treatment plant. So every month we're paying for groundwater, rainwater that infiltrates into our sanitary system. And we haven't looked at what that costs us yet. We probably need to do that, but it's obviously substantial, obviously something we'd like to be able to avoid. The second thing that we don't always think about is that in a similar fashion, when we use up or when we're paying more and using more of our resources in our own system, we're using more of the wastewater treatment plant. When we get to the point where that plant is at capacity because it's processing all that rainwater, that I&I, that plant will need to be expanded. And we will pay our share of that cost, and our rates will go up in order to pay for that plant expansion. The plant just cannot go for a day or two and apologize to DEQ for the dumping the raw sewage into the river. That doesn't work. You have to make sure you keep it out of the river 365 days a year. So if you only have 8 or 10 days that you're surcharging, that's still not acceptable. The last thing it does, of course, again, we've seen this in the VDOT area, is that the capacity in our pipes may be there, but it's being used up by that rainwater, by that I&I. And so in those types of instances, on those days, that sewer is not available to us, that sanitary sewer capacity. So anyway, those are the issues I think we've all heard about and need to address when it comes to the I&I global issues that we face with our system. We've been over this ground before, but are there questions of any sort?
Can I just ask, you talked about relining the terracotta pipes with PVC pipe. Is there a different kind of liner that a lot of other cities have at their disposal, more of a flexible liner that, because I know we're not the only small city or town or big city or town with the same exact problems. And many that I read about are using a flexible liner.
I will defer that to Jeff.
David, the projects we've done in the past, we've been very successful in infield phase 1 and phase 2. And it's a fold-in form liner. It is flexible. It's basically PVC pipe. It's flattened like a pancake. They pull it by a winch through the pipe, and then they inflate it with steam, and that also cures it as well. And then as it cures, it becomes rigid PVC. The problem is you're pulling it through with a winch. If you look at the graphic that was provided you, a lot of our sewer is not very conforming. It doesn't go from the house to the street and then go down the street to a series of manholes and pipes and eventually to the plant. If you look, it kind of runs through everybody's backyard and has a lot of 45s in it, a lot of bends in it. And when we say it's unlineable, it's not only due to condition. You might have some collapse areas, which you could point repair those, then make it lineable. The problem is you have so many bends and twists and turns, you just can't pull it through there with a winch is the main issue, David.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Thank you, Jeff.
I have one. Jeff, when you're talking about in all the different ways that the lines are running and you have 45-degree angles and things like that, will this give you an opportunity to change the route of some of these lines?
That is a very good question. And to be honest, when we kicked off the Diamond Hill phase 1 project, I know that Hurt Profits estimates or Anderson's at that time estimates were based on lining, but I asked our now consultant WRA to do a study of how can we make the sewer more conforming. I know that we can't get it all to the street just due to topography and people have basements. We'd have lines 30 foot deep in the street. We just can't maintain that. We can't afford to build that. The other way around is you have a whole series of pump stations, and pump stations themselves are problematic. We have one for the city now. I'd hate to have a whole bunch more because they do have a high maintenance effort and a high cost of replacement and upkeep. So I did ask WRA if we can make it a little more conforming and at least follow common property lines in people's backyards. So it's not just cutting it all out at angles, going under people's porches, in some cases going under people's homes, quite literally. And they did that analysis. They did it. They also include the fees for acquiring new easement. And say, I can't remember what the exact number was, but if it was $1.6 million to $2 million for the sewer portion of that project was the original estimate, to make it more conforming was going to be $6 million. So it's not impossible, but it takes our $1.3 million overage we're looking at now and makes that $6 million overage. So I would just say to try to do that would probably set back a lot of the other program projects we have by quite a few years.
I think there must be something wrong with this sound because it sounded like you said 6 million.
Yes, sir. That was their number for the sewer only in that certain work area.
Jeff, do you have any, as I'm looking at the Diamond Hill currently, and I see Jackson Ave and Highland Road in the future, do we have the same problems in that development as well, or do you have any sense of that yet?
Without having the camera work, I can't really answer that, Mr. Mayor. I would assume that we probably would to some degree. I know that a lot of the projects that are bundled into Jackson Avenue Phase 2, when I went back and looked at Hurt Profits or then Anderson's estimates, they actually included full replacement of a lot of the lines in that network. So I think that probably cost is accounted for, but maybe the Jackson Avenue Phase 1, we could be light on again. And I need to point out, I pointed out to the city manager and I point out to Jake that when all these projects were developed in 2015, they're here and there, they're all over. So starting this year, when I started looking at neighborhood by neighborhood improvements, I bundled Draper Aiden's water projects, Hurton Property sewer projects, and that geographic, I bundled them all together. Then I looked for what was not included, because there were certain portions of lines that were included in all those individual projects. And that's where I try to include those costs under what you saw is the Diamond Hill Phase 1 or the Jackson Avenue Phase 1 or the Jackson Avenue Phase 2. That included the outliers that were included the individual projects. The individual projects, if you look in the CIP, are still there, but I try to include the overages and the outliers in what was truly called the Diamond Hill Phase 1 or Jackson Phase 1 and 2 projects. So I try to make it all encompassing. But to get back to your original question, without a lot of camera work, it'd be really hard to tell at this time. And the other issue too is if you can't line it, it's a hard time getting the cameras through it too. So sometimes you can't get the camera through it to even tell if it's lineable. So.
And probably, if you can't tell, it probably means it's not lineable.
That's correct.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, council members, for those questions. I guess the next thing that I'd like to address or bring up is that, given the fact that we see I&I is with us throughout the community, there's just no one fix that's going to resolve our I&I problem. We know we've got it in Sarah's Run. We've seen some of the data that Jeff has developed there. We're going to have it, as we've seen from the overall system data, we're going to have it throughout our system. And we're going to be dealing with it for decades. But if we want to address it in any way, shape, or form, we're going to have a comprehensive program, fund it annually so we can start addressing that and get us on a better trajectory so that we don't spend money, literally washing money down the drain every time the rain comes. And you'll see later on that I have a proposal as to how we could accomplish that. But we have to begin annually putting aside money to deal with this problem or this issue. And it's not that the repairs that Jeff is indicating could be done in the Diamond Hill area or in Jackson Street area can deal with all those I&I issues. Some areas do not require the extensive or comprehensive improvements that we see in those areas, but they still demand some attention from an I&I perspective. And we should, I think, from a standpoint of using our money effectively, we want to make sure we repair those issues or deal with those issues. So again, that we're not spending money running it through the pipes and down into the MSA. I don't have any questions for that. I think it's pretty simple, but nonetheless, that's what I would recommend as we go forward. One of the other things you'll find is an attachment in your packet, and I apologize because it's very small, is a map of the sanitary sewer system in the city. And it's very tough to read. I've got a large one on my desk here. Part of the disadvantage of meeting virtually is we have to look at what's on the screen and it's quite small. But this map Jeff put together, and it shows the major interceptors or backbone of our sewer system. It shows the shaded areas as the areas where we have old infrastructure, very well identified old infrastructure, pipes under the ground. And again, Jeff could take you a little bit more through that in some detail, but I did want to touch on something that the mayor mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, is that the IDA noted that we do have some problems in our sanitary sewer system. The IDA would like to be a partner or be part of the team that helps us put economic development in the forefront in the community. And because we lack some information and some data, they suggested they could be responsible or helpful in bringing forward a study or studies to look at different areas of the community and determine what kind of infrastructure do we have there? What do we lack, if anything, to assure ourselves that the property or properties can be developed in the future. And that is really an excellent suggestion. I wouldn't advise us to try and tackle the entire community at this time or have the IDA do that, but maybe look at a specific area of the community, maybe Route 11 South, maybe Nelson Street to the east. Pick an area and just look at that. And you can see again from this map how you probably divide the community up by those mainline sewers and some of the areas that they impact then in the community. At least an effective way of dealing with it. Jeff, did you want to add anything to that? You've got some other studies that have also been developed over the years that give us a little additional information, but really with the entire system that we see here, we're pretty limited in regard to what we know, are we not?
That's correct, Jim. What council has before them is a graphic that was generated from our GIS. So this is the actual line work in our GIS system. It's fairly accurate as far as horizontal layout, what you see. It does have pipe sizing in it. I don't know how accurate that is in all cases. The main thing it lacks is a physical survey of, say, structure rims or inverts, which are the most important things when you're trying to model a system. Some of the data, it's not all doom and gloom. Some of the data we do have, or at least was handed down to me in the most recent past, would be our 2013 Woods Creek Interceptor and McCorkle Interceptor / McCorkle Pump Station sheds. That was done as a joint effort, to my knowledge, by the city and Rockbridge County PSA. It was a simple Manning's capacity analysis. It did survey both interceptors, so they're physically surveyed. We have the data. They did flow monitoring, and they did account for some future build out. And no significant problems were brought out by that report. I would tell council, and I've told anybody who's asked me, that I do not trust the flows that were presented in that report. I don't trust them for two reasons. When we jump ahead to our most recent studies, we have flows probably double what was found. And when I go back to some other studies we did in the past, and I'll highlight in a minute, some of the projections were again double, which were included in that 2013 report. And I would say double what was estimated for future build out and including I&I in that report. So I'll jump ahead. 2017, I talked to Mr. Kennedy and actually running a hydraulic grade line analysis, which is a little more in depth. It doesn't just give you a ratio percent pipe full. It actually gives you water service projections, and it can help you predict overtopping events. So again, we did that for the Woods Creek Interceptor, and we did it for the McCorkle Interceptor and Pump Station. Civil Consulting Group did it. They used the data that was provided in the 2013 Anderson study. And again, they could not find any issues with their systems, but I'll segue and say, as probably most of the council knows, at that same time, we're having a series of overflows in our Woods Creek Interceptor behind Waddell Elementary. So I had done my own grade line projections, and I came up with a number, a flow value that would take the first structure behind Waddell. And then I asked the consultant to go back and rerun the model and determine what flow would pop the first structure behind Waddell. And that flow was 2,000 GPM. Now, once the first structure pops the lid, that serves as a vent. So flows can go much bigger than 2,000 GPM. But the point I want to make, in the 2013 report, future build out with I&I flows were projected to be 1,000 GPM behind Waddell Elementary. So, further analysis shows we need to at least have 2,000 GPM. So I'm a little suspicious of the 2013 report, as everybody's kind of gathering. Now, the most recent study we did was, of course, the Sayers Run interceptor analysis. And as council recalls, I requested permission to use I&I funds to do that analysis. And that system was physically surveyed. All the manhole structures were surveyed, invert data was gathered, but also including that was HAP Doppler flow monitoring. again, if you go back to 2017, I had Civil Consulting just use prior flows from the 2013 study. I purposely asked for flow monitoring, although it cost us $20-something thousand for this study, just so we weren't kind of biased by prior studies that had been performed. As everybody's aware, we found tremendous amounts of I&I. We noted capacity issues during high rainfall events. But I want to bring to council's attention that if you look at the terminus of the blue Sarah's Run line, and if you remember from prior discussions here at council meetings, that I think the peak rainfall for just the Sarah's Run, the peak flow that was monitored during that study was, I believe, 1,700 GPM during a rainfall event. Now that's just the Sarah's Run. If you look at the map where Sarah's Run and Woods Keep come together, we didn't flow monitor it during this report, but if you go back to what I said, the 2013 report behind Waddell, they're predicting 1,000 GPM as a max. Just above that confluence, we're getting 1,700 GPM just for Sarah's Run. So again, that kind of highlights, I think, some of the flows that were projected in that 2013 report were somewhat speculative. So we do have data on our primary interceptors. We also have data from just our surveys that were done from the capital projects we've done to date. We've done infield phase 1, infield phase 2, which provided meaningful, well, I should say all the structure rims, inverts, pipe sizes were documented, so we can now put that in our GIS. We've also got the current Diamond Hill project that has been surveyed, so we have that data. So as we progress with our capital projects, we are acquiring data we can now dump into our GIS system, but there's still a long ways to go and all that.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions from council? If not, I want to go on to another section, and of course you can see that in front of you, and that it's other needed projects. We've been discussing I&I, which we're all very well aware of. We've been discussing the CIP projects that were put in place in 2015, but we also know that in recent years, we've discovered or bumped into other problems or challenges or concerns in our system that are not included in the CIP schedule. If we want to address those issues, we have a couple of choices. Either one is we take some of those CIP projects and push them out of the 30-year project list and just do not take care of those projects, just decide not to fund them, not to deal with them in the 30-year time frame, or we find additional dollars to deal with both the new projects and the existing CIP that we've somewhat committed to. We know it's out there. We wanted to do those projects because they're identified as projects that are badly needed with some old infrastructure that needs to be addressed. So anyway, if we were to address some of those new projects, I just put for purposes of information that a 5% rate increase yields $270,000. That's 5%. We probably don't want to go anywhere close to a 5% increase because right now we are scheduling a 3% annual increase just to pay for the projects we know that are there and handle our operating expenses, et cetera, et cetera. That also doesn't take into effect any rates from the MSA. So it leaves us very, very constrained if we want to try and take on any of these newer projects, any of these newer challenges that we see that really do limit our economic development or our redevelopment potential in some areas of the community. Questions in this regard? So the big question is, what do we do with project funding? And as I noted earlier, the utility budget takes into account and the rates takes into account both operating and capital expense on both the water and the sewer side of the equation. And if we're going to look at funding something in the future, we've got to look at whether it's water or sewer, probably some significant rate increases or finding other areas of funding that might be available. In the current projected FY 21 through 26 period, Jake has done a pretty good analysis of what we need there and I'll ask Jake to take over and do some specific commentary on these areas. Jake, can you take us through these things a little bit?
Sure, Jim. So looking at the FY 21 through 26 time period, Gary had previously built out a 30-year model, a financial model for the utility fund, and taking into consideration these projects, the revenues that we would need over that time period, bond financing, et cetera, in order to absorb these costs and keep the utility fund with positive cash balance. So I started to look at this model, and if you're breaking down wastewater versus water projects, wastewater projects are approximately 45% of our long-term CIP, so just a little less than half. If you break that out on our available cash flows that we would have to work with for these CIP projects, that's just shy of $5 million. And current sewer projects total just over $7 million. So that's why we had built into the model at certain points in time where we would need to finance projects through bond issues. The next upcoming ones in FY 24 and 26 of approximately $4 million and $5.7 million. Long term, there's approximately $25 million in bond issues over the 30-year period that will be necessary in order to finance these projects. The issue you run into with financing, we of course can evaluate bond issues for handling a lot more of these projects, but it's kind of a double-edged sword. Unless you have several millions of dollars worth of projects to combine and finance at one time, with the interest rates combined with the cost of issuance, it's not really cost effective to do so if you're only talking $1 to $2 million. You end up paying a lot more in interest and cost of issuance, and it makes it just long-term not a cost-effective, viable option. Similarly, if you do combine projects and you start financing larger bond issues, you do run into potential problems with your rate covenant. So you have to maintain a certain amount of operating revenues to cover debt service. We do currently have a healthy margin. However, if you start issuing several more large bond issues, as you can see, that would be problematic as well in the short term without a significant influx of cash to be able to cover debt service. So just as an experiment and just as an exercise to kind of see where we are with this model, I went ahead and took the data that we had available already built out. I plugged in 1.3 million additional costs for the Diamond Area project. And I went ahead and pulled 3 of our highest cost projects over the next 30 years within that unprogrammed CIP and plugged them in over the next 10 years, just accounting for the unforeseen projects that we might have to address sooner, surprises, et cetera, what that would look like. If we do this, we only barely maintain a positive cash balance and utility fund balance with a 3% rate increase each year. The margin is razor thin. It doesn't take into consideration any contingencies we may have, unforeseen expenses, MSA rate increases. So I think if we were to move forward with this, we would have to consider elevating that scheduled rate increase above 3%, especially in the short term, in order to maintain solvency, if you will, in the utility fund. Very, very thin margin. And it is worth noting the $120,000 debt obligation that's currently outstanding where the utility fund is repaying the general fund. That expires at the end of FY 22. That does free up $120,000 in cash flows. However, the ultimate replacement of these meters is not currently built into the model. That will be something to take into consideration within probably the next 5 to 7 years as these current meters begin to get some age on them, and we need to model how we're going to finance to replace them. So long story short, we do have some significant issues with the current needs in the CIP and maintaining adequate cash flows given our current rate structure. And just a little bit further, I went ahead and pulled some of our historic rate data to examine. And as you can see, over the last roughly 10, 11 years, there's been percentage increases each year, but due to the compounding effect of these percentage increases, the true rate increase from FY 2009, for instance, to what we are today is over 100%. That's over 100% rate increase in just about 11 years. And as you can see, within the last 2 fiscal years, there's been significant increases, and a large percentage of that is due to wholesale water sewer increases from the MSA. So this is something we're definitely going to have to be cognizant of moving forward. There will, in all likelihood, be additional capital projects and other needs at the MSA, and potential additional rate increases over the next several fiscal years. So this is something to definitely be aware of as we plan and restructure our model.
And Jake, it's fair to say we also have the catch-22. If we clean up our I&I substantially, we'll have less that's processed. So the MSA will have lower revenues. We'll have to jack the rates just to stay even, much like we've seen in the city water system for our end users.
That's very true. It's all a balancing act here between our system and their system. If we save money, that means less revenue for them. So that could entail rate increases to make up for the differences. So it's a very, very delicate system.
But theoretically, they would have lower costs too, right? I mean, we'd have to share the savings with their Rockbridge or whatnot, but because they have lower costs, we would still save money.
Theoretically, yes.
Theoretically, but their cost has been going up significantly. I mean, that's nothing's going to go down at the MSA.
Right.
Jeff, shape my expectations. What's the expected life of these meters that were installed, 5-6 years ago? I think, or maybe 8 years ago at this point. And what was their life expectancy when they were put in?
I believe the batteries have a 10-year life expectancy, and then the meter itself is probably 20. So you have various components in that network.
And I'm sure they're very special, extra expensive batteries.
Probably so.
Murphy's Law. Members of council have any other questions for Jake on his numbers?
Just one observation. When we reduce I&I and reduce the flow into the MSA, it extends, some of their physical plant life because it's not being overworked. So keep in mind those long-term cost savings, because they won't have to replace a pump or some expensive piece of equipment because it's not getting worked as hard just by pure I&I. I know when Jordan Coombs gave me a tour over there, looking at a lot of the equipment over there, it's, there's a lot of bubble gum, there's a lot of baling wire, and that I just does not do anything to help that situation at all.
But I think it's also fair to say that just as, we're grappling with this, the Rockbridge PSA is looking to expand their capacity and take, water and sewer out to the Interstate 81 interchange in the next 7 to 10 years. And so, any savings that we provide in I&I going into the water treatment plant, it's going to be gobbled up by, eventually another hotel out Route 11, another hotel, behind Pizza Hut, eventually, possibly. So we're, that MSA is going to need to expand, and their expenses will definitely continue to go up.
No argument there.
Yeah, that's clearly true. The thing is, if the more the MSA, or excuse me, the PSA expands, the share of the plant that we pay for will go down, provided that we eliminate some of the I&I. So that's one thing that moves in our favor. And the other thing, frankly, is if they do expand and another hotel comes up, that does benefit us all economically in the community. So it's incremental, but we can move incrementally in the right direction, both from an economic standpoint and a financial prudence standpoint, hopefully.
Hey, Jim, the handout recommends an I&I program, and I just like some idea of what an effective I&I program would cost us annually. I mean, what are we looking at? What do we need to make that effective?
You know, I don't think we really know that, Dennis, and that's why I recommended doing something like $250,000 a year. It'll give us an opportunity over 4 years. It'll give us an opportunity to look at how effective that is and what the gains are. And it's a very short time frame realistically. And then we can look after that. How do we plan the next 6 years after that? Or we or somebody else who is our successor. But we'll have better data. We'll know what kind of impacts we have with this effort. Clearly, it's going to be significant, but what will it produce? I don't know. And it's also going to be contingent on the areas of the city that we work in. You know, some areas we're going to have older pipe. There's going to be more impact because there's more inflow today, but we really have never even measured that. As Jeff said, only in a few areas have we measured that I&I. So we have no idea what we're going to find other than if we concentrate in areas of older pipe, probably more impact and better results. But I'd like to say we should do something significant because the return is pretty good.
And I'd like to add, if I could, I went before council, maybe it was a year ago. We were on the I&I issue, and I said we wanted to spend some of our I&I monies on doing, of course, the Sarah's Run study, which we did. And then we would look at going to the Providence Hill area, because I had 2017 camera intelligence says that that area, that was the half of Providence Hill going to the Woods Creek interceptor, not going to the Sarah's Run. But our intent was maybe to launch I&I efforts there and just line as much as we could for the dollars we had at the time, which was $300,000 to $350,000. So that was our intent. And then along came the Sarah's Run study, and kind of we have a little bit newer priorities. If we can boost that account, we can maybe line as much as we can in both the Providence Hill sector that goes to Woods Creek and also comes to Sarah's Run. In the meantime, we did bid a 5-year term IQ contract, and Amliner was a successful bidder. So we do have an on-call capabilities to manage our lining efforts. And, you know, I could look at our current unit rates in that bid and just see how much pipe theoretically we could line. I'm not saying we could by any means go and do all Providence Hill in any given year, but I think Jim's assessment of $250,000 would get us a pretty good ways. At least from the camera footage I saw, we would have some point repairs to do. I mean, there were sections that were significantly degraded, but we're talking about replacing 20 foot here, 20 foot there, but be able to, you know, line many hundreds of feet at one time. Most of what we saw in video was concrete pipe. It does degrade. It degraded on the golf course. Hydrogen sulfide gas tears it up. But you know, it's a lot longer stick length or lay length. So you know, it's not like terracotta where you have little 4-foot section of joints where there people in the day were bending it all willy-nilly and added, you know, fittings here and there. So, and if you look at our current CIP, we're looking at Diamond Hill, Jackson area. I mean, it's going to take us years to improve those sectors. So, you know, it's worthwhile to go ahead and leapfrog ahead and go ahead and maybe look at lining in the Providence Hill area. It's maybe next up to bat with as far as aging. We do know it's lineable, and at least we get that portion of our sewer work out of the way while we're really banging away again, Diamond Hill and Jackson area, some of our really old neighborhoods.
Where does the potential of a stormwater fee fit into this? I mean, it's not in the recommendation that's in the memo, but we did do some work to kind of tee that up for implementation.
David, that's a whole different topic. I don't see those funds going anywhere into their sanitary sewer system, to be honest.
I just didn't know if, as far as, again, stormwater, if as far as I&I, if that was possible. Okay.
I mean,
I think I asked this, excuse me, every time we talk about I&I, but to refresh all of our memories, at what point does DEQ really start to look at this a lot more closely and say, guys, Lexington City, you really need to do something about this I&I problem you have?
I truly don't know the answer to that. Chuck. We report maybe 2 or 3 overflows a year, and they seem to go unnoticed. We don't get any blowback on them. We report them. We report when we fix them and how we fix them. So I'd have to ask somebody at DEQ, to be honest, with the when do we get on their hit list? But to my knowledge, with dealing with them on other issues, say our industrial discharge permit for the public works yard, the topic of our sewer system doesn't seem to come up. So I don't think we've hit that point yet, Chuck.
Yeah, fair enough. It's good to know. Thank you.
Any other questions? And Jeff, thank you for that information. We sort of jumped ahead a little bit to recommendations, which isn't a problem. One of the things I did want to mention as we looked at the rates, because we talked about it earlier, is after we put this together, Jake got additional information from the MSA. And if you look at their increases over the last 15 years, it's been a 7% average. So I'm not saying that's what it'll be in the future, but we all know they're doing a lot of work over there. There are costs over there. So if you put that 7% with the 3% we need, we're at 10%. And if we need a penny or two more to address any of these other issues, we're putting pretty substantial burden on our residential users and any new businesses or existing businesses in the community. As I think Jake said earlier, the mayor might have said, you've got that compounding effect that goes on pretty quickly. And 6 or 7 years now, you've doubled the rates to your consumers.
Based on the meetings I've attended over there over the last couple of years, I would say 7% over the next at least 5 years is a conservative estimate of rate increases. It's frustrating, it's disappointing for everybody involved, but that's the way I'm seeing it right now.
Yeah, I would add to that, Chuck, that the MSA is prudently, although we don't like the rate increases, doing what the city did back in 2015. They currently have consultants on board to assess their situation, provide them recommendations for infrastructure improvements. Those recommendations, to my knowledge, have not come in, so the sky's the limit as far as the dollar value of improvements. So, I mean, they're doing the prudent thing. If they come back and the consultants say they need $1 billion worth of improvements to keep both plants running, and I'm sure we're going to pay for that some way. So I would agree. I think 7% is probably, a minimum of what we're going to be facing in the near future.
It's fair to say the plant obviously is not getting any younger and healthier like the rest of us. And they've had some near misses, and we obviously have to have those services for our community.
True. Other questions? All good questions, and I appreciate it. If not, we've got about 12 minutes left, so I'll jump to recommendations, and I'm not sure which one of you anticipated the recommendations on the I&I, but again, I think we have an opportunity here to take some funds that we didn't think we had just 2 or 3 months ago. And this would be a very good investment to, over 4 years, put it towards a comprehensive I&I program that Jeff could put in place and that would have some real impacts over many years. Again, I don't believe I can't tell you, nor can Jeff tell you today what the returns would be, but those returns year in, year out over several decades would be substantial. So that's all I would like to say about that. But I think it's an opportunity here that we probably ought to consider very carefully. I would ask and recommend council to consider it very carefully because I think it has value to us. The next thing I'd recommend is to look at how do we fund other projects that we know we're going to have? How do we stay on top of, frankly, what are probably projects that do have some built-in overruns just because of some of the things that weren't considered in those studies that Jeff referred to. Again, the terracotta pipe being unable to be lined. The fact that the projects we're putting together, which are comprehensive in a neighborhood, might include 2 or 3 blocks that were identified as a project, and you jump to the next project a block and a half away, and you just don't ignore that block and a half in between. You do that at the same time. You don't just leave it. So those studies inherently left out places that were served by the same stretch of pipe. They were just 2 or 3 blocks removed and down the road a bit. And when we go in, we're going to fix it all. We're not going to fix part of it now and the other part 5 years from now or 7 years from now. So you've got that type of, just Jeff outlined, that kind of cost increase. So as I look at where we have money, the biggest resource the general fund has, or one of the biggest resources, is our sanitary system. When our sanitary system functions right, we have the ability to provide ourselves with economic development options and opportunities that, if it's not working right, will not occur. We also suffer, at least to some extent, a quality of life impact if we don't fix these issues today. We don't want to leave ourselves in a situation where on any given block or any given neighborhood, a half a dozen times in the year, Jeff and his crew are in there digging up a piece of sewer line and disturbing the neighborhood, tearing up the infrastructure, tearing up people's driveways, whatever we happen to have the sewer line running under. It's minor, but it has a cumulative impact, I think, on our community. That's not what we expect. That's not what we anticipate we're going to deliver to our residents into the future. So if we look at where our resources are in our sanitary system and what it delivers to our general fund, and then look at what we have in our general fund, we have an extremely healthy general fund balance because we've been very conservative. You as council members, Gary in his role as finance director, previous city managers have been very conservative, and we now have a fund balance that is exceedingly significantly higher than typically is necessitated. 20% is what's generally required, and that would be on our current balance, our current operating budget. It would require about 3.8 million. When we take that out of our fund balance, which is almost 9.5 million, we have over $5.6 million in excess. We don't have to spend that. I spoke with Gary a few days ago, and he did say hello to everyone, by the way. He's doing very well, enjoying himself, planting raspberries and blueberries and blackberries and enjoying retirement. But I asked him, how did we get where we are and why? And he said, well, there are a couple of reasons. One is we wanted to make sure we had plenty of cash in case we had a very serious problem. And I said, well, what do you mean by a serious problem? And he said, well, if we had an economic downturn for years. Okay, that makes some sense. I agree. And he said, the other thing is that when you go out to bond, it's nice to have excess cash on hand, because if there are other questions, they always look at that excess cash and it makes you more bondable. But as we got into conversation, he did say, Jim, it does make sense, though, to take some of that extra money, invest it in sewer projects, because it does have an economic return on your investment. The general fund will benefit by that. So if you were to take some of that reserve and invest it in that fashion, there's good justification for that. As you see the analysis we've done, and Jake looked at what have we done in the last 5 years, is in regard to increasing that fund balance. We've increased it about $390,000 plus in a year on average. What I proposed is we spend about $283,000 a year from the general fund, and which would be 5% of that general fund balance.
Your name. Sorry about that, Chief.
Anyway, if we were to spend just say 5% a year, we would always have, on an annualized basis, still more coming into the fund balance, as long as we managed prudently and financially watched what we were doing, as we have in the past. And so we don't have a risk of actually decreasing the fund balance at all over time. Now, we might have a bad year, but we have good years. There are many years when we put together more than 300,000, more than 390,000 into the fund balance. And there are bad years, maybe when it's 200. That's why we have something called an average. If we had a depression for 4 or 5 years, yes, that's a game changer. We'd have to change a lot of things. But in the long term, making this type of an investment does a number of things for us that are very positive. It does put us in a position of taking advantage of opportunities that exist today. It deals with some of the issues we know that we have, whether they're the long-term issues that are 60 years old, or the current issues we're stumbling on that have created challenges for us as we move forward with economic development. I would urge council and recommend we take a very strong look in the future at how we finance our sanitary sewer system improvements. And this is our biggest resource available to us. We have money available in the general fund. We have a, if not a true cap on the rate increases, we have maybe a moral cap or a practical cap as to how far we can go before it becomes very uncomfortable for our residents and businesses. And based on those factors, to me, the obvious place to look is how much can we safely spend from the fund balance? Was council comfortable with? Would you like us to line up some projects that we could bring to you in another session a month or 2 months from now to give you further information to look at as in regard to priorities? But clearly, if we're to address these priorities, I don't have another better recommendation for you. So I don't know if there's any other questions from council. Jake is here with us yet, as is Jeff, and we've got about 5 minutes.
Members of council have any questions or responses from Jim's presentation?
I don't have a question. I do have an observation. I think this is a very sound way to move forward. I think this is a good idea. I think getting a handle on I&I will pay us back. It's a good investment to make. And I agree that our general fund balance, that 200 and some thousand a year, I think that's entirely reasonable. So I would be supportive of this.
Others have any comments?
I guess I second Dennis's support for looking forward and see where we need to prioritize and spend on I&I. It's not going to fix itself, and it's not going to get any better. And it's always been a thorn in our utilities side. So, and it's a drum I guess I've been beating for a long time with Mike Kennedy on getting a handle on this. And I think it's, not gotten to crisis mode yet, but sure is getting close.
I would agree with that, and not just I&I, but just sanitary sewer improvements overall. I think it's a wise way of funding it. We do have that extra money, and I think this is, the community has put that there over time, and I think we need to take care of the community with it.
Yeah, Jim, when we talked last week, when we met, or maybe it was earlier in the week, you heard my thoughts about it, and certainly I think you and Jeff had laid out a pretty good plan and justification. And certainly we really can't ignore it. So I won't be here, but I think it'd be a good idea to lay out those priorities, and sounds like a combination of funding these projects would be a good idea.
Michelle, you may not be on council, but I trust you'll still be a customer in need of the services.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah.
I definitely see this as something that we need to work further on. I mean, it could be like a catch-22, because if we were to leave it, that would affect our development and growth. And if we fix it, it's going to be very costly, but we can look at that as an investment. I was doing some research this week and was just trying to figure out how old those pipes really are. And Diamond Hill was started in 1883. And it was in 1922 that they started doing some additional work because they saw what bad condition all the streets were in. And then it was after World War II that they did even more. Very similar situation for Jackson Avenue, where it started out changing, well, it was called Clay Street at first. And Clay Street turned into Jackson Avenue around 1872. So my question to Jeff is that, do you think all of that pipe is all original that you're looking at, that terracotta pipe? Because it's much older than 100.
I can't easily answer that. I would say, yeah, you have pretty good odds. I don't know why somebody would replace terracotta pipe with terracotta pipe. They had the opportunity to use a better product. I know just in my time being here the past 5 years, we have done repairs here and there. So I'm sure there's newer PVC sleeved in older terracotta pipe systems. But I would, in my opinion, is by and far that a lot of the Jackson and Diamond Hill areas are probably the original pipe. And it makes it problematic to line it because as you look at the graphic, especially in the older neighborhoods like Jackson, Diamond Hill, it's kind of agglomerated build out. It wasn't a planned development. I mean, they had probably people owned acres and acres of property. They had their sewer lateral going to the sewer system. Then they parceled those out, sold them, and they all joined into that lateral. And that's why the sewer mains are in people's backyards. Whereas you go to maybe more planned neighborhoods like through the Enfield area that we lined, the sewers were more conforming, not always, because we're in a topographically challenged area. I mean, it's got to go downhill. But by and large, when you get to the Enfield area, what we were successful in lining, a lot of times the sewer is in the street. The laterals are coming to the street. It's good straight runs of pipe. It's lineable. I believe Providence Hill is that way as well. We'd have to talk about Walker Street in that area, but probably would lend itself to lining too. But Marilyn, what you just said for the Diamond Hill and the Jackson areas, that probably the pipes with the dates you referenced, probably a lot of that is original, unfortunately.
We've been fortunate for a long time.
Yes.
I know we're past 8 o'clock, but I got one quick question. Everyone's agreeing that it's a good recommendation. I want to just clarify, are they agreeing that they like the recommendation of about the $241,000 a year for the next 4 years? Or are they agreeing that they like the recommendation to do that in addition to dipping into fund balance and starting to whittle down, fund balance a little bit at 5% a year? I just want to clarify which of the recommendations everyone thinks, or I just want to.
I was saying both. I think we need to
Both.
do both I&I and continue with or increase the volume of number of sanitary system.
Okay. So essentially, an extra $600,000 to $700,000 a year in utility fund projects paid for with cash. I just am clarifying. Okay.
David, to your point, two things. One, for those who have joined us, we are still in our work session and have not started the regular meeting yet. But I think the concept is sound. I would hope that there may be some funding, whether it be state grant funding or I'm not sure what, but some type of infrastructure, if you will, shovel-ready type projects that may come down with additional funding given the COVID-19 issues that we're experiencing, keeping people working and opportunities. Don't know what's going to be out there, but I feel very confident that Jim and the team will seek grants as much as possible for these projects. But your point's very well taken. I don't think this is the time or place to begin chatting about it, but our general fund balance averaging $399,000 overage in the past 5 years, the annual contribution, I don't have a great deal of confidence that we'll see those kind of numbers going forward. Maybe I'm just being pessimistic, but we had some very positive and high growth years with new facilities coming online, like Robert E. Lee and the Georges cranking up and providing additional revenues to the city. But without getting into that level of detail, my sense is, Jim, thank you for a terrific presentation and overview of the challenges that we have. I'm not going to go so far as to say that you made sewer sexy, but it was a positive conversation. And much like we had probably 10 years ago, Chuck, talking about water improvement, and we just finally finished downtown, may have been 5 years, I can't remember exactly, but we decided not to kick the can down the road any further, but to embrace and deal with these. The business of the city is about providing services for our citizens, and it starts, I think, with water and sewer and having quality water and sewer systems for our citizens and our visitors. And working on the funding through grants, CIP money, and fund balance. I do hear Gary's voice in the back of my head talking about cash flow and making sure we have enough money to pay our bills. So having that abundance over that requirement is critical. And lastly, I'd just say it was ironic. Many of you probably subscribed to Rockbridge Alert, but as we began this work session, there was a message about the sewer replacement that's going to be on McLaughlin between Nelson and Myers tomorrow morning. So seemed ironic that we received that as we began this discussion. I would like to go ahead and wrap it up unless anybody has something significant for before we depart. Jim, I would ask that in the next 45 to 90 days to plan to come back to us with additional discussion and details on how to move forward with some of these projects and addressing maybe some of the details that were raised from that standpoint.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I have 8:06 on the clock, and if it would suit, that we'll break and come back at 8:10 and begin our regular scheduled meeting. And apologize to folks joining us, but council members have been at it since 7 o'clock and may need a brief break. We'll resume in 3 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the appointed hour of 8:10, and I would like to reconvene, or rather convene our Thursday, November 5th, 2020 Lexington City Council meeting. Thank you all for being here. And as we, before we start the regular items of the agenda, I did want to pause and ask everyone to join me in a moment of silence in remembering and honoring Louise Moore, who died recently, who was a council member in 1988. She served her first term and then came back on in 1997. Personally, I'll be forever in debt to her for being the council that appointed me initially to the school board and began my service with the city. But Louise was a fascinating and wonderful woman who was one of the founders of Historic Lexington Foundation, and we still reap the benefits of her guidance from that initiation many years ago. She was a substitute judge, and if you haven't read her obituary, I encourage you to go back and see the inspiring things and the inspiring life that she led and the time that she spent here in Lexington. So if you will, join me in a moment of silence for Louise Moore. Thank you all very much. Next, if you will please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the
To the
flag
flag of the United States of America,
States of America,
republic for which it
the
stands,
republic
which
which stands
one
in a
nation.
one nation,
liberty and justice for all.
for all.
Liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all very much. And as usual, I look forward to when we have a bigger flag and can face it all together in person. Next item is consideration of the agenda, and wasn't sure if anyone had any items or issues to add or delete. I would just point out after our public hearing on the comprehensive plan, we'll ask for council's consideration on that item. Hearing none, we will accept or adopt the agenda as presented and move straight into the public hearing. Is Arnie going to make some comments prior to?
I believe Arnie is with us. Arnie?
Yeah, sorry, I'm having the mute issues. I do not have anything prepared, but we do have Catherine and Kelly that will be doing the presentation.
Terrific. Should we have their presentation before the public hearing?
I believe so.
I would say go right ahead, ladies.
All right, give me one moment to just bring up the slides and make sure that we are all set to go. Can you all hear me okay?
We can indeed.
Wonderful. All right.
While you're preparing there, I will go backwards. I'm not sure if Jeff stayed on with us, but wanted to echo appreciation for the work that his team does and his participation in the presentation that you made tonight, Jim. Thank you all for that work session. That was significant information and details that will help guide us as we move forward, focusing on the infrastructure and services for the city. So, Kelly, are you ready?
I'm ready. I've got the presentation queued up on my side, and it looks like I was just made the host. So let me see if I can share now. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my screen. All right, how does that look over on your end? Catherine, does that look okay?
Yeah, I can see it.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Kelly Davis, and I am the planning director for Berkeley Group's planning and zoning team. And we are so happy to be able to be here tonight with you virtually. We wish we could be there for you in person. This has been a really important project that has been near and dear to Catherine and my heart over the last year that she and I have been on the project. And but I know the Planning Commission and Arnie has been working on it for much longer than that as well. So thank you all so much for having us here today. I will go ahead and start out by introducing myself. Again, my name is Kelly Davis, and also on my team I have Catherine, and I believe John is also on the phone with us as well. We've been working with Arnie and Planning Commission to really refine a strong plan and make sure that this was ready to go despite many challenges, including the virtual format, which the Planning Commission handled effortlessly and flawlessly. So with that, I think I'll go ahead and turn it over to Catherine to kick us off with the introduction and move through kind of what is a comprehensive plan. Catherine?
Sure. So can we advance? So this is what we'll be working through tonight. We'll review the planning process that got us to this point, and then review the content of the draft plan itself, and then talk about kind of next steps from here if there are any. Next slide. But what I'm going to cover first is really the planning process and the framework, what's gotten us to this point. And I'll start with the basics. I know many of us know what a comprehensive plan is, but for anyone on the call tonight who doesn't, just to cover those basics, a comprehensive plan is a long-range planning document that localities use to guide the many decisions that they make over time. It is meant to be a high-level vision and policy document that informs those more detailed or regulatory documents that the city uses on a daily basis. A comprehensive plan should describe the community's vision for where it wants to be in 10, 15, or 20 years, and offer specific strategies to get you there. Much of what goes into comprehensive plans in Virginia is dictated by state code, but they are at their heart a community-driven process, and each plan is unique to each community. So Lexington's comprehensive plan has essentially been a 4-phase process, and we are currently in phase 4, specifically in that adoption portion of the phase. Planning Commission has recommended the plan to the City Council with some minor corrections which have been made. And tonight, City Council, you all will consider the plan and receive public comment, and then potentially move forward with adoption. But of course, with these kinds of documents, adoption is not the end goal. The plan has to be implemented, and part of implementation is continual review, monitoring, updating. Comprehensive plans and documents like them are meant to be living documents that reflect the needs of the community and allow for course correction as new challenges and issues arrive. And to that end, the state of Virginia requires 5-year review, but of course we recommend annual review as the best practice for making sure that those documents are meeting a community's need. So as we said, comprehensive planning is a community-driven process, and the development of Lexington's comprehensive plan has been no different. We kicked off the planning process with a large public forum, and we're ending the process with a series of public review and comment periods. In between each of those, the process included many different platforms and opportunities for people throughout the community to weigh in, be heard, and share their thoughts on what needs to be included in this plan. And I will say a lot has happened in the world since the initial kickoff in 2018, and many of the edits to the plan in recent months have been in response to those events to make sure that this plan is as current as it can be and addresses those issues to the best that it can. In particular, following feedback from the June public forum, there were several substantive changes to the plan aimed at addressing really diversity, inclusion, and equity more directly. That included discussion of Lexington's pretty challenging past in terms of diversity and inclusion, and making a concerted effort to bring equity and fairness and justice really to the forefront of the policies included within this plan. Since then, we have worked with the Planning Commission and made those changes. And following the September public hearing with Planning Commission, most of the changes that have come to the forefront have really been about clarification and refinement of the plan rather than significant policy changes or shifts. And that, of course, is the ideal outcome of an open and responsive public engagement process. So the next slide. In addition to those issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, which I mentioned were the focus of the last few months of working on this plan, there were other key ideas that floated to the top throughout the engagement process. These are ideas that were important to the community and that we incorporated into the plan. And this is just those that I said that bubbled to the top, but they included the lack of job opportunities, particularly for younger people, affordability in the community in general, but as specifically related to housing, the lack of shopping and retail services. Now, Lexington has many quality of life amenities, but this is one that people pointed out that seemed to be lacking to some degree. And as well, a strong desire to see the community more walkable, more connected to each other. This community input, if we'll move on to the next slide, was bolstered through a pretty thorough baseline analysis on our part. That baseline analysis included collecting data and information about the social, physical, and economic profile of the city. We looked at census data, we looked at local data, as well as doing on-the-ground field work and observation. And combining that data with information received through the community input process, we arrived at this key set of challenges and opportunities that really form the backbone of the policies and strategies included in the plan. The first of those is development potential. Lexington is largely developed. It's an old city and can't grow its boundaries outward. So when we make recommendations in this plan about land use and development, we had to think pretty innovatively about accommodating growth and paying particular attention to the form and character of that kind of development coming into Lexington. We know Lexington has a hard time retaining young workers and families. Nearly half the population is made up of college-age people, but only about 8% of the population is made up of recent grads or young workers. And a large part of that issue is affordability. Affordability in housing, both as a result of market demand, as well as housing stock. A large portion of the homes in Lexington are much larger, much more expensive, much older than most young people or older people can afford to buy or to maintain. So as we look to the next 10, 15, 20 years, we had to ask the question of how we can create more choice in housing to retain young people within the city, as well as allowing older people to age in place. We also asked the questions of how we can lessen the emphasis on automobile travel to make a safer, more attractive, more connected community for all of Lexington's residents. We also asked how we can lessen the burdens on traditional infrastructure systems. Lexington's an old city, it has old infrastructure. So how can we integrate green infrastructure to make a more resilient, connected, and healthier city? And we also have to ensure that the work that we do to address all of these challenges and opportunities is done equitably for all of Lexington's residents. So those challenges and opportunities directly informed the vision statement for the plan. And a comprehensive plan's vision statement is like a mission statement or a guiding principle that guides the content of the plan. And this vision statement was crafted largely by the city's Planning Commission, and it reads as follows. The City of Lexington will develop strategically and sustainably by diversifying economic opportunities, housing options, and transportation methods while protecting the city's rich historic and natural resources and preserving the quality of life enjoyed by its residents and visitors. This vision statement is supported by a series of 5 planning values that really are designed to provide more direct guidance on the goals, objectives, and strategies included in the plan. And I won't read each of these, but the 5 planning values in the plan are accessibility and diversity, sustainable economy, local identity and character, citizen engagement, and management and collaboration. And part of defining these values within the plan was defining the terms that we use within them. And the Planning Commission and we as a team felt it was pretty important to define diversity, particularly given national events and the focus of the plan. And so we included a definition for diversity within the plan that reads, diversity is paramount to understanding our community's history, enjoying its present, and ensuring its future success. Diversity includes the many individuals and groups, both demographic, such as race, age, income, family makeup, neighborhood, self-identification, such as sex, gender, politics, or religion, or any other differences deemed important to the people that live in, work in, or visit in Lexington. So those planning values and the definitions behind them bring us to the planning elements. And these elements are really the meat or the framework of the comprehensive plan. They provide that framework for the goals, objectives, and strategies that will allow the city to implement the policies behind the plan. Now, there are many different features and aspects for what make up a community. And of course, every community is different. And through this planning process, these were the 9 planning elements that were identified as important to the community of Lexington. They are historic resources, green infrastructure and natural resources, local economy, arts and culture, housing, land use, transportation, community services and infrastructure, and finally, governance. So how do all of these pieces fit together? I like to think of it as a hierarchy with the vision statement at the top, supported by those 5 planning values, both of which are articulated through the 9 planning elements. Each of those planning elements contains an overarching goal and then supporting objectives which align directly with the planning values. They also include a series of more specific strategies and action items which will achieve the goal for that planning element, which in turn achieves the planned vision. So that is the overview of the framework of the plan and the planning process. I think I will now turn it back to Kelly, who will walk us through each of those 9 planning elements.
Thanks, Catherine. So before diving into each chapter element or planning element, I'd like to just introduce the overall chapter structure. What we're going to cover today in this presentation is just a very brief overview of all of the policy and information that is included in the plan. So each chapter includes an introduction that gives it an overarching view of that particular element. It also includes what the community had to say about that particular element, and you'll see that kind of tied throughout the discussion that I'll dive into here in a moment. We also talk about the various planning factors and baseline information that provide context to the chapter, as well as a big focus of partnerships and existing initiatives that exist in the community and can help support Lexington in achieving the particular strategies in the chapter. Each chapter concludes with a needs assessment that then informs the goals, objectives, and strategies, which are truly the policy elements of your plan. So the first chapter or planning element that I'll discuss is the historic resources chapter. The core of the comprehensive plan really begins with this chapter. And during the comprehensive plan outreach process, Lexington's scenic and historic character was identified as a top asset that community members value. And these needs really, such as bolstering the cultural and recreational experiences, are evident in the strategies that are shown here. To just set this up, the statement in bold is the goal of the chapter. And then we have objectives that are shown and displayed on the screen that help to support the overarching goal. And then beyond this, which are detailed in your overarching or in the full plan, are the various strategies. Some of the strategies in this chapter include encouraging development and redevelopment of your historic downtown properties, and educating property owners of historic properties on appropriate maintenance procedures and requirements. As Catherine mentioned before, during the public review period, it really became apparent that this chapter would require a more focused review and intention in order to tell a more complete story of Lexington. We spent a lot of time working with Planning Commission to revise the chapter, and that review included gaining input from local historians and advocacy groups as well. And so through that public refinement period, this chapter was expanded to include narrative to address history and diversity to help tell a more complete story of Lexington, and acknowledge that importance of understanding the difficulty and inequities of the past in order to build a stronger future together. One of the items in the chapter that was revised through that process did include the existing historic resources map, which was modified to include neighborhoods like Diamond Hill and Green Hill, which were not originally noted in the draft plan. I think this map really shows the longstanding attention to historic preservation and planning in Lexington, and it's demonstrated in the quality of Lexington's historic downtowns and neighborhoods, as well as the numerous programs, policies, and partnerships that are throughout the community. The next chapter is infrastructure and natural resources. And as the goal states, this chapter serves to protect, preserve, and promote Lexington's natural ecosystems and green infrastructure as a cornerstone of sustainable development and social, environmental, and economic well-being. As part of this update, green infrastructure was evaluated by a citizen working group that was tasked with examining existing conditions of green infrastructure in the Lexington community, as well as providing recommendations for improvement to be considered. Key needs identified by the working group focused on creating an interconnected, publicly accessible network of green infrastructure, as well as promoting green infrastructure benefits, incentives, and resources. So the full set of strategies is included in the plan, but I do just want to point out that, again, this chapter received a lot of focus from the community in terms of ensuring an interconnected network of green time assets and promoting energy sustainability. This chapter also provides a green infrastructure network that I mentioned in the previous slide, and key opportunities for improving green infrastructure and natural resources in the community. The next chapter focuses on Lexington's local economy. The local economy, as I'm sure everyone is well aware, is built around education, health services, tourism, and regional commerce. And the goals, objectives, and strategies address needs such as expanding the tax base and continuing to create a business-friendly government that provides easily accessible resources. Some of the strategies in this section include streamlining business licensing, permitting, and other regulatory requirements, and continuing to implement downtown improvements to promote tourism. Arts and culture is really apparent, again, through when you map all of these existing resources that are included in the city. And the chapter focuses on how we can leverage all of these existing assets to transform Lexington into an even more vibrant cultural hub in 2040. Arts and culture needs were identified by a dedicated working group and highlighted opportunities to better leverage existing space and resources to expand access and diversity within the arts. The goals and objectives focus on fostering expansion of artistic cultural assets through the community, including placemaking and citizen-led events. Example strategies include developing a public arts master plan and considering creating an arts and entertainment district to leverage revitalization funds for arts initiatives. This is another chapter that included a focus on equity and diversity through the public refinement period. The next chapter is housing. And as Catherine mentioned, this was another core focus that highlighted the need for affordability during the community outreach period. Recent market studies also showed a potential need for more multifamily rental housing and additional housing options to support aging residents that may wish to downsize out of single-family homes. However, due to limited undeveloped land, Lexington must look to options such as accessory dwelling units and adaptive reuse of existing buildings to meet the housing needs of future residents. Some of the immediate strategies out of this plan include reviewing your regulations on accessory dwelling units to potentially allow them in separate structures, and also encouraging things like energy efficient design and rehabilitation resources for residents. Land use is arguably the most important chapter of your comprehensive plan. And so I'm going to spend a few more additional slides on this. This slide highlights the key land use needs that were identified through community outreach. The comprehensive plan survey confirmed what probably comes as no surprise to residents or the council, that Lexington's small city character is highly valued. And through these surveys, we also learned that residents desire more housing options, more retail, restaurants, and healthcare uses, as well as attention to preserving open space. And these are some of the key needs that were addressed in the chapter and guided the development of the future land use map that's shown in this slide. The land use chapter is unique in that it provides guidance for the character and location of development, infill, and redevelopment over the next 10 to 20 years. And the plan prioritizes the creation of a more connected and accessible community, along with the continuation of traditional neighborhood development patterns and the protection of cultural and natural resources. So I do want to just point out in this slide that this truly becomes your guiding policy for the future land use in Lexington. And it consists of what we're calling gateways, which are the major lines that are shown on your roadways, and corridors, centers, opportunity areas that are shown in the hash marks. These are the core areas where you may see change over the next 10 to 20 years. And then under all of this lies the land use pattern areas that really kind of, in most cases, are your existing patterns of development with opportunities for improvement. And again, this is reinforcing, or a figure from the plan that reinforces those pattern areas or those development patterns that we see throughout Lexington. The future land use map is accompanied by the land use goal and objectives provided here. And example strategies include prioritizing capital improvements such as wayfinding, streetscaping, undergrounding utilities and gateways, corridors, and centers, and ensuring that your planning and your land use decisions are consistent with the land use map. The next chapter is transportation. And Lexington has a small but very complex transportation network that must accommodate a growing number of users. And as the city looks toward the future, it really must consider how to balance the needs of all of these different users. You have a very high percentage of people that use walking and bicycling as a form of transportation. So we must really figure out how to balance all of those needs together in the transportation network. Since Lexington's road network is projected to accommodate automobile traffic through 2040, transportation needs focus heavily on pedestrian, bicycle, and safety improvements in this plan. And that's truly reinforced by the strategies that are included in the plan and the goals that you see here. A required component of your transportation plan is a list of priority transportation improvements. And these are the priority improvements that were identified through the public engagement process. The PDC actually helped to develop the transportation chapter and identify these improvements. And so those are shown here. In addition to these projects, there are 2 studies that were identified, a bicycle and pedestrian plan and a VDOT road safety audit for several intersections in the city. The next chapter is community services and infrastructure. We're almost there, so stick with me. The 2018 Comprehensive Plan Survey revealed a number of service priorities for Lexington's community facilities, with particular emphasis on parks and open space. We know, and as you all were discussing earlier today, that water and sewer infrastructure will also be a high priority, and so that is also reinforced and emphasized in this comprehensive plan. In some cases, Lexington will also need to continue working with regional partners to address cost-effective solutions for shared services like the libraries and jail. And that's truly what is captured in this goal, this chapter, and the strategies included herein. This map basically just shows your existing services and facilities in the city. Lexington is wonderfully blessed with great access, particularly to parks and recreation facilities. And I'll move on. And the final planning element that we have is the governance chapter, which examines the functional role of government as well as initiatives to increase citizen participation and ensure information is disseminated timely and accurately. And the goals and objectives in this chapter are designed to ensure that Lexington maintains an effective and transparent city government that works on behalf of its citizens to implement the comprehensive plan. And this was another chapter that received some attention in the public refinement period, and additional language was included to address equity and diversity and provide strategies to increase specificity and measurability. And last but not least is the implementation chapter. We know that when the plan is adopted, that's when the real work of implementation begins. And this chapter describes the tools to implement the plan and assigns priorities and responsibilities for those strategies. As Catherine mentioned, as a best practice, we recommend that the implementation matrix be reviewed annually as part of the city's budgeting process to help set those budgeting priorities and measure progress toward meeting the city's vision for Lexington of 2040. We also, unique to this plan, is the Catalyst projects, which Planning Commission is working to identify some core projects that it can begin moving forward with immediately to show their commitment to the comprehensive plan and to the work that's been done, and really start to make progress in a way that's measurable and transparent and easily moved forward. And so with that, we have the next steps truly being the City Council public hearing tonight. And before you today is an opportunity to approve the plan as it is and adopt the plan. You can also choose to amend the plan and adopt, or you can choose to disapprove the plan and remand back to Planning Commission. And so with that, I stand ready to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kelly and Catherine. Great presentation and great work by the Planning Commission as well. Do members of council have any questions for our presenters? Hearing none, I will proceed with opening the public hearing. And we do have a few people who have requested to join us this evening and speak. And first on that list is Lee Merrill, and Lee will be followed by Hugh Latimer. And so Lee, we welcome you to the meeting and your comments.
Thank you. Greetings, Mr. Mayor and City Council. I'm speaking on behalf of the Rockbridge Area Conservation Council's Land Use Committee. As you move to approval of this very fine work, my kudos to the Berkeley team, this Planning Commission, the planning staff. This is a really fine product. However, our committee asked council to make 2 amendments within 2 paragraphs of the Partnerships and Initiatives section, page 90, regarding the master planning process and institutional zoning overlay for Washington and Lee University. The first paragraph, as proposed, currently reads, W&L is currently undertaking a significant campus master planning effort, the adoption of which is subject to city review and approval. In considering such proposals, the city will continue to encourage Washington and Lee to look within its present holdings for future growth rather than acquiring additional land. Not only would additional expansion further erode the city's tax base, removal of viable commercial activities from an already limited downtown is harmful to the health and vigor of this vital commercial district. This first paragraph attempts, as we see it, to reflect a previously agreed principles to locate future university growth within the existing institutional overlay, halting sprawl, erosion of the city's tax base, and intrusion of institutional uses into the commercial and residential neighborhoods of the city. However, the draft language is inaccurate to that previously agreed policy, using the word holdings. And we propose a simple fix by correcting this error, substituting institutional overlay. So the amended sentence to the comp plan will read, in considering such proposals, the city will continue to encourage Washington and Lee to look within its institutional overlay for future growth rather than acquiring additional land. The second paragraph of the same section, page 90, reads, the university owns most, but not all of the houses in a block bounded by Glasgow, Nelson, and McLaughlin streets and adjacent to the university's Lenfest Center. Any proposed redevelopment of this block should mimic the scale and architecture of adjacent historic homes. The Land Conservation Committee believes this paragraph inappropriately signals the possibility of demolition of existing affordable housing in an existing residential neighborhood zoned R1, green lights redevelopment for institutional uses, and imposes arbitrary design guidelines. Am I still being heard? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm sorry. There's something wrong with my end. The Land Conservation believes this paragraph inappropriately signals the possibility of demolition of existing affordable housing, green lights redevelopment for institutional uses. RAC asks that the second paragraph be deleted, leaving the agreed upon statement of general principles in the amended first paragraph above. And the city's established zoning guide the city and university in considering any potential future amendments and approval of Washington and Lee's master plan. As drafted, the second paragraph may bias future city council and the planning commission reviews and put pressure on the city to look favorably upon master plan proposals for expansion. Its inclusion is contrary to the current zoning, which W&L could, with reason, interpret as an endorsement of continued creep. It also gives sole recognition to the least green approach, redevelopment, implied demolition, over rehabilitation or renovation, and eliminates an opportunity for the city to support its comprehensive plan goals, ensuring affordable housing and social justice values. This second paragraph should be deleted and better addressed in future amendments. I have some comments on the appropriateness of how much more time can I have? Those are the two asks that we bring to the table tonight. But can I have another minute to go over one other item? The relevant to future planning for this neighborhood, our committee applauds the comp plan's new planning tool called Opportunity Zones, found on page 98, utilizing a well-conceived small area planning process. Quote, the planning process should begin with a community discussion to identify specific development goals for each area and assess the need for additional guidance on planning, design, and investment. The small area planning process will be most appropriate for those areas where significant revitalization or development may impact surrounding neighborhoods or vary from the underlying pattern area principles. The small area planning process will examine these areas holistically with full engagement of the public, elected and appointed officials, and planning professionals. Specifically describing the McLaughlin Street Opportunity Zone, the new comp plan states the project's opportunity vision as the McLaughlin Street area is poised to create a unique live, work, arts district as an expansion of downtown. RAC's Land Conservation Committee is willing to be part of and contribute to any community involved small area planning process here and throughout the city. In conclusion, thank you for your attention to and full consideration for adopting tonight. And we encourage you to approve the comprehensive plan as soon as you think it's ready. It's an excellent document. But to include these two amendments, substituting institutional overlay for holdings in paragraph 1 and deleting the paragraph 2 of the partnership and initiative section. Thank you very much. This is from myself and my co-chair of the Land Use Committee, Chris Wise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lee. Next, call on Hugh Latimer. And Hugh, if you could, I was remiss with Lee, but Hugh, if you could state your address for the record.
Sure, 3020 Hemlock Road, Roanoke, Virginia. And I'm a university architect for Washington and Lee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. And we additionally really support the effort and the product that's been developed in this comprehensive plan. I want to speak tonight to address the 2 points that were made before, and I'd like to address the second one first. We have been working through our master planning process, which is still in draft form, for over 2 years. And we've been working with the Planning Commission and their consultants and participants throughout that. And one of our biggest challenges has certainly been what I'll call fourth year housing. The university really wants to bring with seniors, if you will, back close to the university campus. We don't, rather not have them driving at night. And if we get them close to the campus, we can better initiate them into campus life after coming out of class, if you will. But there are challenges there in terms of finding suitable housing and suitable housing that the students actually want to live in. And we did a lot of surveys with a wide range of young and older students to find out what they would be interested in that would be potentially available on campus and close by in the town, in whatever fashion that might be. And one of the aspects that rose to the top was the housing at McLaughlin Street. And in particular is of interest to students who are involved in the performing arts, music, and graphic arts due to its adjacency to the Lenfest Center and Wilson Hall. And in fact, it was very, very, very close to campus right across the street. Our challenge at the beginning was what to do with the housing. What's been incorrectly stated, I think, in another letter that was submitted to council was that the university rents out these houses in McLaughlin Street to those unaffiliated with the university. That's completely untrue. Every tenant we have on all of the properties, we own all but one, but every property we have that's livable as either one house with students, there are 2 houses with faculty members, and all the other houses are leased by faculty and staff associated with the athletic department. And it's we're absolutely able to give them a perk, if you will, on rental rates for them. So that has been and continues to be the university community living on that property. Now, one thing we were facing was that some of the properties are very dilapidated. 1 or 2 are probably not structurally sound. And we were trying to figure out how could we provide a livable community for our students, yet keep the character of the neighborhood. And we've been working with Sasaki and Associates doing our master plan. And they were aware and participated in some developments at other liberal arts colleges in Massachusetts, which faced similar issues. And what they were able to do was, instead of demolishing some older houses that had serious limitations, they were able to come up with a new concept whereby in the backs of them, if you will, they would add additions that would have the intrusive engineering and difficult features such as new bathrooms, kitchens, utility rooms, things that really would not be able to be code that were in the buildings before, like stairwells and windows you can egress from the second floor for life safety. And then in the front, in the older part of the houses, what you do is you do a light touch, and that is you renovate them with new electrical and lighting and power, new telecommunications, but most of the other intensive renovation features you don't have to do for them. So they become the living room and some cases the dining rooms and the bedrooms above. So we looked at that. We understand exactly what is permitted on the property in terms of zoning, and we stayed with our planning within that number of residents per building, parking, and the other qualities like that. We shared that with the Planning Commission, and that concept was well received, and they offered a lot of input and suggestions to us, and we continued to move along with that. So we very much would like to keep that second paragraph, because what that second paragraph reflects is our sort of joint goal of coming up with a rational plan of providing housing in scale and appropriate to that particular neighborhood. If done right, it's a win-win for our students and university, and a win for the community in terms of rehabilitating the housing stock there. Additionally, in regards to that, they mentioned the opportunity zone, and it's of interest to us because for years we've been planning what we could do with maybe one of the houses in terms of part of its living area, in terms of creating a little community center for the arts due to its relationship across the street to Lenfest and Wilson. And we would certainly relish the opportunity to work with the downtown arts community to see how they could support our students and vice versa. We looked at that as a very interesting opportunity. On the first point, so we really request that the language not be changed in that second paragraph, that it be kept in place. In regards to the change for, let me make sure I get the term right that you had before, holdings. We think that there's a lack of understanding of the university's property community in regards to this recommendation. Yes, we have an overlay, but we also have other precincts in the town. Right across from Frank, right across from your offices, is Davidson Park precinct owned by the university, and that's been in our possession for maybe 100 years. And that is an integral part of the university community. And that includes fraternity houses and theme houses, basically between Washington Street and Nelson Street. You look a little confused about where that is, but it's pretty much across the street from 300 Washington. Time to time, we have done additions and repairs and changes to the theme houses and the fraternity houses and such in that neighborhood. It's zoned R1. It's not part of the overlay district, but we want to reserve the right to continue to provide whatever development might be appropriate there in support of that residential community. That is one zone, and therefore, if you change it, if you take the word holdings out and just institutional overlay, that would imply that we would only be dealing with that property that's on the overlay. There are a couple of things that I'd like to correct here. This states, and we've heard otherwise, that when the university purchases a property, it gets taken off the tax rolls. And what really happens is that every year, the university adds up what is lost by the city in real estate taxes not collected by the university having the properties, and the university gives the city a grant equivalent. So the city is made whole for what that's worth. So we asked that institutional overlay not be used, so that holdings means that we can go ahead in the future and treat those other precincts similar way that we do our institutional overlay. So we do not view that word institutional overlay as an error. We think it is absolutely correct. And again, we really would like the opportunity to continue to work with the planning committee in this sort of novel, somewhat novel concept for McLaughlin Street in terms of that type of housing. We feel that if that paragraph is taken out, it would be a signal that the plans we have in mind are not appropriate, and would also signal that university and the planning commission and the representatives were not working on a plan or concept that was valid and appropriate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate you being with us and sharing those. And members of council may have questions, so I hope you'll stick with us through the conclusion of the public hearing. Next is Chris Wise. Chris, did you want to speak tonight as well?
Yes, if I could. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Great. I just wanted to respond to the gentleman who just spoke. I don't see in particular what the problem is about removing the second paragraph. I think that Mr. Merrill made pretty clear that the planning opportunity zone concept that's in the planning documents and enables this continuation of a process of cooperation between the university and the planning commission and the city. And it, to me, that language in that second paragraph really sort of is not, sort of hobbles the planning commission to be able to is making some presumptions about how things should be developed. And that hasn't been nailed down by the planning commission. So I think that that's something that that second paragraph could easily be removed without ruining the cooperative spirit between Washington Lee and the planning department. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate you being with us this evening. Janie, was there anyone else that has joined and wanted to speak?
I don't have anybody else.
Okay. I know we had a letter from HLF, and I'd asked David Ziegler to read that letter into the record. David, if you would proceed with that.
Sure. It's a letter from Beverly Tucker on behalf of the Historic Lexington Foundation. Dear Mr. Mayor and members of City Council is preparing to address the draft of the city's Comprehensive Plan 2040. This represents the comments of Historic Lexington Foundation on one provision of the land use section of the plan pertaining to the McLaughlin Triangle. HLF appreciates the efforts of the City of Lexington to compose a comprehensive plan that will direct development in the city in the coming years. This is critical and the effort should be applauded. We also applaud the work of the Planning Commission to help focus the plan. That said, HLF has serious reservations over the section on land use dealing with the McLaughlin Triangle. HLF would like to draw the City Council's attention to that section of the plan, page 90, regarding Washington and Lee University's current campus master plan. While the master plan does not specifically address the homes on the triangle, the draft comprehensive plan states the design and condition of the houses on the triangle do not meet the needs of the university's expressed desire for accessibility and energy efficiency. The second paragraph on the page goes on to state that any redevelopment of the triangle should be in line with the scale and architecture of adjacent historic homes. The Planning Commission did attempt to ameliorate the language in the paragraph, yet their recommendations still imply the redevelopment, presumably demolition of existing buildings, might be appropriate if done within the historic context of the adjacent historic homes. When the university first began acquiring the buildings on the triangle, it justified this due to the needs of student and staff housing, as noted in the draft comprehensive plan. In reality, most of the homes are rented to individuals without affiliation to the university. In discussions with HLF, the university also told HLF that the university was acquiring the properties to ensure maintenance due to the close proximity to the university campus. HLF strongly recommends that the second paragraph in the land use page regarding the McLaughlin Triangle be deleted, leaving the agreed upon statement of the general principles in the first paragraph. Retention of the second paragraph potentially serves as an encouragement for Washington and Lee to demolish the buildings on the triangle and put pressure on the city to acquiesce to future university master plan language with regard for redevelopment of the McLaughlin Triangle. HLF thanks the city and the City Council for its work and for consideration of our concerns. Beverly Tucker, Board President.
Thank you, David. I'm not aware of anyone else who would like to speak tonight to this matter. I'd like to close the public hearing and give City Council an opportunity to respond to the comments that you heard this evening, and then certainly your consideration for the recommendation.
I'll start by responding to some of those comments from the Planning Commission standpoint, and then I do have one recommendation for an amendment to the plan as well. But from the Planning Commission standpoint, we wanted the second paragraph. We pared it down from what it was originally. But W&L, like any property owner, they are not that property on the triangle is not in the historic district, so they could demolish that and rebuild under our existing guidelines. They don't need Planning Commission's approval. They do have to get a demolition permit. So assuming they could do that, we felt that we should have some language in there to limit what would ever happen in that space and make sure that it matched up with the rest of the neighborhood. I think that still stands, that it's important to have that paragraph in there. If we as a council want to let future councils and future planning commissions, if we want to give our input, I think you keep that second paragraph in there as a safety net. They can always amend it in the future, but yeah, I'm not quite sure how RAC or HLF thinks we would be better off without that paragraph. I think it's our opportunity to give input to future councils. I'll stay on this subject if anyone else has any comment before I bring up the change I want to address later.
I have a question or two, but first I'll mention that my spouse does work at Washington and Lee, and so I just throw that out there, but I don't believe that affects me being impartial on asking any questions, and I don't believe I have a conflict of interest. I'll also say that I did live in I lived on McLaughlin Street, and I think 111 maybe in 2002. The house needed work back in 2002 that W&L owned. I heard Mr. Latimer mention that it's a goal of W&L about fourth year, the seniors. And I just clarify if that's a change in policy, because in 2018, when Steve McAllister spoke, when we were kicking off the comprehensive plan, he talked about this specific triangle, and he talked about it then, and he said the goal was not to bring seniors back onto campus in 2018. And he also talked about then that he did not foresee any demolition, but only upgrades to these houses. And so I would just ask for clarification on that. And then I would also ask for clarification about the statements made about payments in lieu of taxes, and to clarify that, yes, these homes are being used for housing. And so therefore the school does pay, in theory, the city a rate for them. If there's redevelopment into into dormitories, if you will, would they be treated similarly? Would in theory, the city of Lexington receive more funding, more money, because the value would go up if W&L rebuilt things?
I'll try and respond to that. That second question's intriguing. I do not know the answer to that. My understanding, and maybe we could follow up with Steve McAllister later, is that when we purchase a property, we know what the real estate tax is for that property, and we make sure that we cut a check to the city for that amount that they are no longer receiving. In terms of a future change to the property that raises the property values, I really don't know. We'll have to follow back up with you on that. What was the first part again? I'm sorry.
Just to clarify, if it's now part of the strategic plan to
I'm sorry. Yes.
Back onto campus.
Yeah. Earlier, back in 2018, we were still trying to look a little bit more comprehensively at how we might mix students within the campus, particularly in regards to upper division housing, which has been a very, very popular hip with the students. But since then, we did all of these surveys, and it really came to the forefront that there are a significant number of fourth year students who would like to come back toward campus, and student affairs is very in favor of that. So that's why we sort of refine that, if you will. I'm a preservation architect, so I will say that I appreciate a thought that we might be able to save everything, but unfortunately there are a couple of buildings, particularly the yellow house, which are really probably structurally unsound, and it's going to be a real challenge to save that. What we want to do in this concept, and we think that by quote unquote putting a low impact use into the front of the houses through the living area and the bedrooms, maybe dining, is have a better opportunity to save more fabric than we might otherwise be able to save. But it's not realistic to assume that we could basically restore those houses to what they were 60 or 70 years ago. In addition to that, we would not get a certificate of occupancy from the building official if we did that, because when you do a comprehensive renovation, when you spend more than 50% of the value of the property in a renovation project, you're required to bring it up to current code. And the list of code infractions from the Virginia Residential Code in those buildings is quite extensive, and some of them would require a lot of work to correct if we took a different approach other than these infill additions in the rear. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful to kind of hear that kind of a new thinking from WNL about seniors out loud, because I think that hasn't really been out there. People are concerned about that, but I think it's also something helpful to clarify if when Washington Lee acquires property, they base their payment to the city on the value of the property when it is acquired. And so if they acquired 12 out of the 13 properties in that triangle, and let's say they were worth a total of $700,000 when they acquired them, and they're going to continue to pay taxes kind of based off of that rate. If they were to be demolished, and let's say a $5 million structure was put there that serves the same purpose of providing beds for students or faculty and staff even, does WNL pay taxes, or if you will, the PILT, based on the new $5 million number? Because I don't believe that they do. It's based on the original value of when they acquired something. And so I think that that's just helpful for the public and for the, the good of the order. I would also just ask about the Davidson Park point. I'm not sure that's, I understand about that point, but I'm kind of just focused on this opportunity on that zone right now. And I think that's what the comprehensive plan was also thinking about. So, and then, well, I'll just leave it at that for now.
I have kind of a follow-on question to the payment in lieu of taxes, and this might be best directed to Jim or Jake. My understanding is right now, Washington and Lee pays annually about $600,000 in a payment in lieu of taxes. If nothing were to change, like if Washington Lee were not to acquire any additional property in Lexington, would they still be paying $600,000 in 30 years? I mean, does that figure, is it tied to anything, or is it just, I mean, it's tied to the value of the property when they acquired it, is my understanding. So there's no mechanism to increase that in the future, correct? Because if that's the case, then I feel like the city needs to be looking very, very hard at any future purchases to make sure that at least inflation is covered. That's something to me that, and for that reason, I feel very strongly that RAC has it right, and that we should be encouraging them to stick with the institutional overlay. That doesn't mean that it's proscribing that, but it's saying that we're encouraging that. And I think that that's fine. And I kind of disagree with Leslie. I feel like the second paragraph kind of ties our hands, and I think it would be better if that were removed. And that doesn't mean that the university can't do all the wonderful things that they want to do, but I don't think that we need to put this in here now. So I would be wholly in favor of making the changes that RAC suggests.
Dennis, you could remove the second paragraph. I think it only works in our favor to protect ourselves, because WNL.
Yeah, but I don't think it does protect ourselves, because again, I mean,
Dennis, point of order. Let Leslie finish, please.
Sorry, Leslie.
Well, it does protect ourselves because it limits what can go in there, particularly if it is part of their institutional overlay. They are allowed by right to demolish it because it's not in the historic residential district, and then they can rebuild what's allowed in R1. It is right across, actually part of an opportunity zone in an RLC, so it could even be rezoned. So even if it wasn't in the institutional overlay, in the future, something could happen there. And we're taking this opportunity as a planning commission to suggest, to put some limits on what could happen there. A future council and future planning commission may amend that in the future, but we wanted to give our input that it should stay residential and fit in with what is already there for now. If you take that paragraph out, we lose that say.
Yeah, but you just said, Leslie, that they could do whatever they wanted with that property regardless, right? I mean,
no, not necessarily. I mean, it depends if it was rezoned or if it's part of the institutional overlay. But even if it is part of the institutional overlay, we have that paragraph in there saying, you know, we'd like to see that it matches up with the other historic housing in that area.
I'm hearing Leslie say it puts some restrictions on what Washington Lee should do with that property. If you remove it, then there are no suggestions, or there's nothing in the comp plan that would hold them accountable for maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood.
Exactly. Thank you, Frank.
Sure.
Not true.
Hugh, how long has Washington Lee owned the yellow building that you mentioned that's in such poor condition?
Yeah, I don't know.
Give me a guess. Greater than 6 months?
Oh, well, yeah, years.
10?
No, I don't think that long. I think maybe 5 or 6 years. There's a misconception that some of those properties were fine and dandy when we got them, and that we just sort of let them fall apart. Whereas my boss, Tom Kolaski, can attest in facilities. We send our workers over there to repair roofs and do all sorts of things to the occupied houses. They are requiring constant work. So what we have been able to do for most of them is actually improve their condition. There are a couple of houses, like the most recent one we bought, which is maybe second closest to Wilson, which was really in bad shape when we picked it up about a year ago. In the yellow house, we've owned a little bit longer than that. Those houses have been in very bad shape for a long period of time. You don't become structurally unstable if somebody sort of neglected a piece of property for a matter of months.
Thank you for that perspective. I'm not sure how long you've been around Lexington, but HLF is a terrific resource that Washington Lee may take advantage of. And Peter Sills in particular, who took arguably a falling down Jack Roberson house and made into a beautiful entity that is right now right next to the dance studio on Jefferson Street, just as a matter of historic information related. There are ways and methods to rehabilitate even very deteriorated buildings with reasonable, with successful outcomes.
Frank, I'd like to take you through that particular house and see if this might be, you might think this one's a little over the edge, so to speak.
Sure. Well, I'd yield to my my friends at HLF who have a keener eye on that, but thank you. I'd take you up on the offer the tour just for curiosity. You mentioned that the houses that Washington Lee has been acquiring, has Washington Lee purchased those homes? Or I guess I had heard that a trustee had purchased them and donated them to Washington Lee. Can you clear up that myth or fact?
I know the more recent ones we've been purchasing, some may have been donated, I'm not sure. All I can tell you is that we are in full ownership of all of them except for one. That's the blue house that's closest to downtown.
Very good. Other members of council have
I
questions?
just wanted to ask Leslie a question. So the paragraph or this section that we're talking about, Leslie, was this discussed at all in your planning commission meetings? I look back at like a few previous minutes, and I didn't see anything. Or is this a relatively new request and you hadn't, as a planning commission, hasn't had a chance to meet about it and talk about it?
We talked about it when the meeting we approved the plan. It came up as an issue, and it was a longer paragraph that is actually referenced in the HLF letter. And we did cut out some of it that presupposed some information. But we wanted to keep in particularly that last sentence as our opportunity to put some limits and parameters on what could happen there in the future.
And all the members of the committee felt that way.
Yeah, and so that's what we ended up approving, was that.
Right. Okay, I just wanted that clarification.
And would point out, as I recall, that it was a unanimous vote for approval of this document, inclusive of these items from Planning Commission. Do members of council have additional questions or responses?
I guess this isn't a question, but something to share to add some perspective. And I'm not sure how this all falls into the overlay versus zoning, but I recall, oh golly, this goes back probably close to at least 10 years ago when the White House that's next to now Grace Episcopal was which is now the Hillel House, was in a pretty poor state. And I think just about every effort was examined on how to save that house, either move it, rehab it, and the options that were presented just weren't realistic or feasible. And we have what we have now. And I think it's been, for the university, a very valuable addition and serves some great purposes for in lots of different areas. And just, adding that to the dialogue and conversation to add perspective.
I'm curious, Chuck, my memory is a little bit different. I don't think there are any functional problems with the house. Washington Lee just had no longer use for it, and did offer, I think it was $45,000 to relocate it somewhere, that nobody took them up on it. They would give away the house and money to move it, but it was never, 45 maybe too high. I think it may have been 25,000, but the Hillel House is certainly a significant improvement to that block. I'd have no exception to that. The houses in the triangle are in much worse shape. There's no question about that.
If we're on a new topic, I would like to propose one amendment to our vision statement. And before I brought this up, I did take an informal poll of all of Planning Commission, and they supported making a change. I think the whole plan and the vision statement are outstanding. We did do the vision statement at the beginning of the plan, and as the final product and as our conversation went on, I think there's one word that probably should be changed, and that's preserving. It says preserving the quality of life enjoyed by residents and visitors. When we first started the plan, we had some meetings. We also did the survey, and kind of general paraphrasing the feedback was we want to make some changes, we want to see improvements, but we want to protect our quality of life, our small town character. And that's how we wound up with preserving as the verb in there. But as you read the plan, you see we don't ever use preserving. We use enhancing, elevating, and improving when we talk about quality of life. And I think one of those verbs would fit better in there. And again, this is also from an informal survey of the Planning Commission, they agree as well that one of those verbs should be substituted for preserving.
You want to choose one?
I would suggest enhancing, but I could live with enhancing, elevating, or improving. But I think I like enhancing.
I would be delighted to take that as a motion of recommendation with that change.
Did we have a motion? That was Leslie's motion?
Yeah, that'll be my motion, is to change.
I'll second it.
In the vision.
Regarding the change of preserving to enhancing, there's a motion, a second, any discussion? Hearing none, I'd ask for a roll call vote. Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Ms. Hentz?
Aye.
Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Thank you all very much. We will substitute enhancing for the word preserving in that community vision. And thank you, Leslie, for bringing that up. I think enhancing I like the aspiration associated with that, without a doubt. Would ask for your all's consideration or any further discussion relative.
Actually, I have one more. I would like to make a motion that we change present holdings to institutional overlay, and I hope I get a second on that. Okay.
So Dennis's motion to change holdings to overlay. There is no second. And dies for lack of a second. Thank you, Dennis.
Okay, I have something on page 81 on the housing chapter. Threshold discussed the housing chapter, and we looked at the section that talks about the Community Development Block Grant, CDBG. And in the reference to that, it is listed as we will use CDBG grants and other federal grants. Threshold suggests that we change that to say types of funding sources such as CDBG and the others, rather than say, this is what we're going to do. We'd like to use it as an example of grants we would be using.
Perhaps change it to may.
May, or such as, or as an example. Something to indicate that it is not something that we would definitely use.
I'm not seeing exactly where, I see where it says the block grant funds were unsuccessful due to eligibility.
In the section for Threshold Housing Commission.
Yeah. Let's see.
And down about 1, 2, 3, 6th or 7th line.
Okay.
The Threshold has successfully implemented housing rehabilitation projects for eligible low and moderate income families using federal. It's not saying that it needs to, that it's had success in the past, is how I read that.
The most recent partnership we've had with them was not successful.
Well, and then the next sentence I think says that.
Now, Arnie, did you want to speak to that matter?
Yes, if I could, Mr. Mayor. It also comes up in the strategy, Housing 1.1, pursue funding strategies, including community development block grants. I think it would be appropriate there if you want to make the change to pursue funding strategies such as community development block grants or local revolving loan funds, et cetera.
Does that work for you, Ms. Alexander?
Yeah, it's been consistent.
So there's which page are we on there?
83.
Thank you. If you could state what you'd like changed there. I know Arnie just read it, but.
Pursue funding strategies such as community development block grants. Instead of saying including, say such as.
That's a motion from Ms. Alexander.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Leslie. Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Ms. Hentz?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you all very much. What other items are there in this document?
Down at the bottom of that same page, where we have rental housing inspection program, should we say that City Council has that on hold? Or just leave it like it is?
The body of it does say that. I know it says that somewhere, and I think it's in the body, I'm looking at that page, but do you know can you see offhand which strategy that one is?
HO 5.4.
It's at the very bottom of page 83.
And in the body of it, it does say that it was, we had it and we discontinued it, but that we were going to reevaluate it. So we wanted to make sure and have a strategy that agreed with that.
Okay.
Or push that along.
Do you think the strategy says that?
Well,
Sorry, Kelly, what'd you say?
this is shown on the screen as well. I hope that you all can see that there.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that reads in 2020, the program was dissolved with the direction to reevaluate the ordinance in fiscal year 2021.
Kelly, could you go to page 83?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you want to keep at the very, very bottom where it says reevaluate the rental housing inspection program. Do you want to keep that like it is? Do you all agree that that's all right?
Do you have a suggestion otherwise?
Some of the people on Threshold just made a comment about it, that perhaps it should say the city council has it on hold, but it's in the narrative. So we just need to make sure that both of them are consistent and they mean the same thing.
Right.
That perhaps that it will be evaluated later. So it might read okay.
Though now that you bring that up, we did say we would evaluate it in fiscal year 21, which is now, and it's not in our budget for fiscal year 21. Do we want to take out 21 or just leave it as is?
Just leave it.
Okay.
I just wanted to bring it up since someone in Threshold brought it up. Thank you.
Well, Marilyn, thank you for bringing it forward. And I think as we've had discussions before, it's something we'd really like to work back into our operations. However, finances haven't provided for it in recent years, but keeping it on the radar to evaluate and see if we can find a way to put it back in, or some type of a rental inspection program, I think is prudent the way it's written.
No, what I'm saying is that we were okay with the decision of council. It was just the wording, making sure that it was consistent.
Correct. Very good. Council members have anything else out there? We had discussion relative to amending the plan, deleting the paragraph 2, but have not received attention or a motion for that.
I will move that we remove paragraph 2. Do I get a second?
So you prefer to give, in theory, W&L more flexibility to go grand?
I don't see how, no, sorry.
Because it's right next to RLC. They could ask for it to be, rezoned. It's right next to RLC. And so then they could truly change the area is. And I'll point out also why I didn't personally second the institutional overlay. I mean, W&L owns those properties on Lee Avenue that I don't believe are part of the institutional overlay that they have slated for. I don't think Mattingly House is in the institutional overlay. I don't think the hole, as they call it, for the parking garage is in the institutional overlay. They've already acquired those properties. They're in their holdings, and that's what they're expecting to grow in those properties, whether it's a museum or a parking garage. And I just...
Or a hotel.
It in the comp plan about the institutional overlay.
Yeah, David, I do agree with you that there are probably many places where they're going to want to develop their holdings, and I'm not I'm not saying that we should foreclose that, but the whole point of this is to say that we encourage them. That's the language. We're merely encouraging them to do their development in the institutional overlay. That doesn't mean that they can't develop their holdings, and they likely will. But as far as encouraging them goes, I think that should be the stance of Lexington City. So that's where I'm coming from with this.
Thank you for the clarification for the question. I have a motion. Is there a second to Dennis's motion to remove paragraph 2? Hearing none, that 2 will die of lack of a second. Any other items that you would like to, or pages of the document that you'd like to review or modify? Hearing no one, I would ask for your consideration of the comprehensive plan as presented with the amendments that we've made this evening. I think just the one changing preservation to enhancing.
First of all, I would like to thank the Planning Commission for their outstanding work over 2 years, as well as the Berkeley group, particularly Kelly Davis and Catherine Redfern, and of course, Arnie Glazer, our planning director, and in his support with Bonnie as well. I'd like to thank everybody for their work and the community. I mean, this was a huge amount of work, and many people were involved in it to make it what I consider an outstanding plan. And I appreciate everyone's work that they put into it. And with that, I would like to pass a resolution by the Lexington City Council adopting the Lexington Comprehensive Plan 2040 CPA number 2020-02 with the 2 amendments we've made tonight.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I would just like to thank the Planning Commission and the people in the community and the organizations who had input in this. And when I heard that there was, in addition to equity and diversity, it was something that was, it really struck me that Lexington is on the move, and Lexington is being progressive, and we're all the better for it. All of us are better for that. And I really appreciate that, as well as the information about retaining younger workers and families. That's how we're going to sustain ourselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marilyn. If there are no other comments, I'd ask for a roll call vote. Mr. Smith?
I was on Planning Commission when we did the last comp plan review, and the amount of work that was not distributed as nearly as widely as this one has, and the amount of engagement and participation and contribution that has gone to so many different areas that have provided so much valuable input to this document. I'm really excited to see what planning and Berkeley have produced to put forward as the city moves forward. And I just, how far we've come in the last 10 years with comprehensive planning is remarkable. And without that extensive contribution, it wouldn't be as possible. So thanks to planning and everybody that made this possible. Really proud of it.
I'll take that as an affirmative vote. Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Ms. Hentz?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. I will opine that I perceive this to be a fantastic document that was built from the bottom up. I had someone stop me today and somewhat congratulate and suggest to congratulate council for the input from the public at that first meeting at VMI, where we were all kind of looking around at one another like, what are we doing? And to see it come to fruition and come to this is fantastic. So congratulations. And Kelly and Catherine, please let Darren and Drew know they need to give you a raise. The Berkeley Group hasn't always had such a great name in Lexington, but you've elevated it substantially. We're very grateful for your contributions and the rave reviews. So thank you all very much. And if you want to stay for the balance of our meeting, we welcome you, but understand if you want to call it a night as well.
Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. Next item on the agenda is consideration of the minutes. They were delivered in your packet prior. Are there any corrections or changes that you would like to see? Hearing none, I would like to adopt those or approve those as presented. And that's for October 15, 2020.